Hello, thought I'd make a quick video today just showing the differences between shooting in RAW and JPEG, some of the examples of what you can do with RAW pictures. I shoot everything RAW all the time because I think it's awesome, but I know a lot of people who don't, so I just thought I'd show the advantages. So we'll pull up some pictures from a shoot I did yesterday. Well, I did the shoot Sunday actually. So just some quick examples. Here's the original picture as taken. Here's the picture after RAW processing. Now, when you shoot it RAW, it saves a whole lot more information than you would get in a JPEG. Normally, if you have a JPEG, you could try and blow down some of the blown out stuff in Photoshop, but there really isn't all that much you can do without compositing. But with the RAW image, you can take your highlights here, bring them down, and it'll pull back in a lot of that information where you have control over your highlights, control over your shadows. These sliders called whites and blacks that they changed the names of for Lightroom 4. I forget what they were called in the old one. But then you also have control over the total exposure of your image, which can be really nice if you just had, you know, slightly too dark images because of your light situation or something, or you needed to record at a higher shutter speed, need to boost it or pull it down. You have contrast. And then what I actually did that pulled in a little bit more of detail the way it worked too is they have this vignetting controller. You can just bring that down some and you could mess with it a little more too to make it less noticeable, but still have some stuff in there. But I kind of just like the way it pulls back in a lot of that. And this is obviously the quick version. This is more I ended up settling on. Here's another example picture. They're funny. I have funny people. I need to make a virtual copy. Here's the edited picture, and it was partially just in this case the situation of what we had to be shooting under. That it was really harsh lights. We were on the beach, but we were in shade, and everything else was just completely blown out. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it at that point, because we didn't have the ability to really postpone the shoot or anything. So if I reset this real quick, that's the old one, this is the original picture. You just kind of have this very blown out looking, kind of bland really picture. But you go in and you pull down your highlights again, and I actually ended up masking a little bit and doing some exposure adjustments like that. And you can pull back in a whole lot of that info that would just be permanently lost with a JPEG, because there's not really anything you can do. So another cool thing here that you have is brushes in Lightroom. So you could pull in a brush and then actually adjust within the area of that brush. So it's really just like an advanced masking tool that then you can mask areas and pull stuff back in. And of course my computer's going to be a little slow because of the recording. But so just the quick and dirty masking option. But then you can control that mask as a whole, so I could actually lower the whole exposure on this masked in area. And of course you wouldn't want to do it that much for the sand. And bring back in everything behind them there that had basically been lost. Now some people would call this cheating. I call this a good way to save an otherwise highly unfortunate set of circumstances with a shoot. Or sometimes you have that picture, like say you're at a wedding or something where someone, I don't know what, something happened. You had to run into a corner around something real quick and something was going on, so you just took the picture and your exposure was a little off, and you can pull it into Photoshop and take forever to try and move it around and make it look good, but you really couldn't pull back in nearly as much information as you can shooting RAW like this. So again, there's the original shot as taken. Here's when I went back in and pulled in a lot of that detail and boosted the contrast and stuff some. And actually I'm not quite finished with that one either, but let me just find another example real quick. Here's a funny one. This one I didn't end up being able to pull quite as much back through, but it still improved it a decent bit and pulled back in some of that information again. Here we go. So reset this one. Original shot, blown out, just pull back in some of that data again, so you can expose for them and then worry about the background later. And if you had to, you can go back in Photoshop and do what you have to make it work, but in general works pretty well. Any other examples? Say you have a heavy flare shot. Make a virtual copy real quick. I really didn't set this up as well as I should have, and this is already going kind of long, so I'm going to stop real soon. Promise I'm almost done. A very flary shot like this, that you kind of have a bit of an iffy exposure, you go back in on your exposure. You can tweak your exposure down some. You can boost your contrast some, take those highlights and pull down those right side highlights some, although I actually kind of like them being a bit blown out. Pull back in some of that information, the shadows, so that it isn't all quite so flat. And this is all just in a couple of seconds in Lightroom, what you can go through and pull out. Whereas, say if you have this back at the original one, and you could do some of this in Photoshop. I've used Photoshop a lot, but a lot of it would just take longer, and in my opinion not really work as well, just because it's destructive JPEG stuff. And a lot of it you couldn't do. Like the stuff with those backgrounds would be gone in a JPEG. As far as I know, there's no real way to realistically pull that back in. This is another one, real quick, 2 quick last examples. Another picture that shot raw, pulled in. Here's your original, completely blown out behind them. Just go in and tweak some highlight and exposure, and you have a lot, what I would call a nice picture. It actually saved all that information that was blown out in the original picture, and actually was able to pull down the exposure on them a little bit as well, because it was a little hot. But say you pulled this shoe picture into Photoshop. You could go in and try and use Photoshop's exposure control, but I kind of hate it. It just seems to make everything grayer or whiter. It doesn't actually affect exposure nearly as well as Lightroom and RAW do. You can also use Photoshop Camera, or it's called Adobe Camera Raw, I think. It's the Photoshop version, so you don't have Lightroom, and it still allows you to do a lot of this. So you don't need a fancy thing. And actually iPhoto has some RAW controls in it as well, but I think it's really nice. It's nice to have as a backup. The files are somewhat bigger, but I don't fill up cards that often. Maybe at a wedding you'd be worried about it, but I don't think it makes that big a difference that it's worth it. And I don't do it expecting to need it all the time, but it's just nice to have in situations that, you know, you get that picture and can pull that information back through. This one actually still needs to get tweaked some. I didn't quite finish these yet. So yeah, so that's why I shoot RAW, is to have backups and be able to fix things. Because this picture too, or actually we'll use this one. This picture originally was really, really, really hot. Just really blown out again. You just pull that right back down, and good luck doing that in Photoshop in a non-destructive way and having it look good. So that's my story. So that's why I shoot RAW, and why you should shoot RAW too. So real quick, you should go. You're probably already there if you're watching this, but you should subscribe to my YouTube channel, not my YouTube channel, where I try and be helpful and teach people things. But it is youtube.com/EBourcier1993. And there you can watch entertaining and educational videos and see some of my projects that I've used them on as well. And if you want to see the rest of these pictures, the finished edited ones, you can go to my website, which is EBourcier.com, which is EBourcier.com. And you may be subscribed and haven't checked this out before, so you should go check that out. See some of my design, Photoshop type stuff, video projects, and photography projects. So leave comments, let me know what you think. Do you shoot RAW or JPEG, and if so, why? Thanks. Bye.